welcome to the very first episode of Epiphanies from Edmonton. And today's guest is Maddie Youngman. We were in the same class at UFA, University of Alberta. Maddie studied philosophy at first, and then she moved to gender and social justice. But today's topic is something different, philosophy of food justice. And I came up with the idea from one of the podcast episodes. Maddie was doing with one of her friends, Plans and Policies podcast, helped me to come up with the idea I'm going to kind of place before you today. Because I think coming from two different continents, two different hemispheres, Maddie was born and grew up in Texas, USA, and I was born in Sirajganj, Bangladesh. So we came up with two different ideas from the global north and global south. But here in Edmonton, we saw the context in a very sympathetic way and empathetic way, I would like to say, because we were thinking about the crisis people go through here regarding food, especially the newcomers, immigrants, BIPOC community, and other marginal groups. So I would like to invite Maddie to my show, and Maddie, welcome, and hope you are doing well.
Oh, hi, thank you. Hope you're doing well too. Thank you for having me.
And as I was talking about the podcast that inspired me a lot, Plans and Policies, can we start with, how did it go and how did you come up with the idea?
Well, thank you for listening. I'm really glad you were listening to it. I think it's really important. So essentially, there's a nonprofit that I work for, mainly a research assistant for it. It's called Canadians for Responsible Food Policy. And the co-host of the podcast is also a part of that nonprofit. And so in our research, we found that there was a lot of information that people didn't know. And they didn't know where to get it. They didn't even know where to start. How do you even know where to start with a lot of stuff on food policy, but also just what's going on in other countries, or is there similar struggles, or how are we all affording food at this point? Because it's a really, really important thing, as it sustains us, but it's also full of culture, tradition, history, those kinds of things. And so we sort of had an idea to try to disseminate or spread out that information, right? Make it a more accessible way to access that information, and a podcast is a really good version of that. I think, there's a lot of stuff that you can do, like writing papers or writing articles for news outlets and stuff, but there's something different about a podcast. More personal. You get a person's voice, and you can have more of an informal conversation. I think that's appealing to people. And so we sort of developed the podcast, and I came up with a bunch of ideas about what it is that we should talk about. And one of them was asking if people can even afford the food that we're told that we have to eat, or we're told we're supposed to eat for health, whether that's from the Canadian government or just people we know or whatever, eat your vegetables and all those kinds of things. How do you do that? What does it look like? And so kind of giving that context in that podcast, while also, being fun.
And I think this is what we were talking about in the class, knowledge mobilization. So if you research on something, and we were lamenting the fact that very few people actually read them. And I think doing something like this podcast or other kind of popular contents, making popular content, so it would kind of reduce the gap, I think, between the academia and the non-academic people. I would also like to mention that Maddie with Karen Levinson wrote an article, a couple of lines from that essay. It says, equity and justice are necessary for advancing public health and food security goals. Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada strategy must boost support to growers eco-critically. That was really interesting. And here you were directly mentioning agricultural policies of Canada. And now we are in Canada, and I'm just here for 1.5 years, and you were for 2 or 3 years. And what you see here regarding food and food crisis and choice of food as well, and whether they have the luxury to choose or not. That's also a question. So, particularly, what do you see in this context, especially in Edmonton? Did it evolve, or did it change your perspectives regarding food crisis, or
Sort of. I would say it sort of did. Like growing up, it was definitely tricky, right? Like, oh, was there enough food or is there enough food? Like, but I never really got to choose what I was going to eat, right? Like most kids don't really get to choose. And then you're sort of expected when you go to university that like things are going to be really hard and you're going to be like on university budget and like, you're paying so much money. So I guess you have to live on a certain amount of money and that makes life tricky. And then you can't really eat nutritious food. A lot of the time it's like ramen. It's like the cheapest and like most like quickest meal or whatever. So like some of the work that I do would like look into that and be like, well, why is that the cheapest? Also, why is that the quickest? And like, could that be changed to be like a more healthy option? Right. But there's stuff you can do if you like want to eat ramen, right? Like if I eat ramen or whatever, putting vegetables in it and like some like edamame or something,
because
yeah,
it's so quick.
Yeah, it's really quick, and that's appealing to people, right? Like especially as university students or people who are like young adults and like trying to either restart their lives or like start somewhere new, or just they have a really busy job, or maybe they have multiple jobs. Like those kinds of things really limit your time, and so what are you going to choose? A thing that's cheap and really really easy. So sort of like knowing that when I came here, I was thinking, okay, well, I'm new, right? Like I don't know anything about this country. I'm fortunate that I have a partner who's from Canada, but we were starting our lives over in the middle of a global pandemic. Things are really hard. But I will say that like even from when I first moved here in 2021, things have exponentially gotten worse, especially for people who are low income or who are newcomers to Canada, or disadvantaged in any other way, like being racially like discriminated against or marginalized or whatever. Like those sorts of things kind of stack up on each other, and then it just makes things really, really hard. And you can see this, especially with university students, with food bank uptake and like how overwhelmed the food banks are, especially at the U of A. And they're so overwhelmed that they barely can even like keep up with demand, and also like there's no support for them, so then they're like constantly worried that they're going to go out of business even though there's so much need for it, right? And so you can sort of see that, and it's gotten exponentially worse since like the last 4 years since I've been here. It was never great, but like things are getting a little bit more dicey, and I think a lot of it has to do with people don't know what to do, people don't have time to figure it out, like they don't have the luxury of being able to plan all their meals and have enough money to pay for everything that is like the most healthy thing, even if they know what that is, which not many people do.
I was asking this question because I was really curious, because from where I come, poverty means something else. Mm-hmm. So it's more critical, I would like to say, and it's more severe. Mm-hmm. But here I went to the food bank at UFA once to see and what actually happens there. And I saw that most of the people coming to the food bank are immigrants and international students. And I was talking to some of them, and they were saying that it was an option which if it was in Bangladesh or India, it would be considered as a blessing. But here it's an expression of crisis, right?
Yes.
So we don't have a system like that, and people struggle a lot. So poverty and food crisis means something more severe there. And for me, it was so organized. I mean, it was so properly managed, and I mean, you can have a schedule ahead, and you can go and pick up the things you need. So it was something which we could dream of, in the sense that we don't have any organized system to support people who really are facing food crisis severely. So that's why I'm interested in your perspective, because when you were saying this coming from Texas and I'm saying this coming from Shirajganj, it's not similar. So for me, it's something too organized and it's something we could dream of as a system to support the people who really need it. So that's what came to my mind at the beginning, that I wish we had something like this in Bangladesh. But your experience with food bank, or your experience of talking to people who were going through food crisis, it must be different from mine, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, like, I think, it's all relative, right? Like what your experience was before you came here, and then seeing the organization, right, of everything, you're like, wow, that's amazing. But the standard from my like relative experience is like, well, we're not doing enough. Like we need to do more, like there needs to be more. In my opinion, there needs to be like full government funding of these things. Like people should not be going hungry, right? And like maybe that's also another ideal from where you're from too. It's like, oh yeah, we should do that, but colonization and all these like sort of systemic barriers that have disadvantaged the global South really have set them back. Like this, the only reason why Canada looks the way it does is because of colonization. Like the power and wealth that they got to create systems like this were not created lightly, And so I think that's unfortunate, right? Like we got a good thing out of that, but that's like from what cost, Like we really did a lot of damage here, like unforgettable damage. And that shouldn't be the way that we're able to progress or like get something good, right? Like our society shouldn't look good because we did something bad or like screwed people over. So yeah, it's kind of gross. It's kind of messy, but I do see what you're saying. Like this does look better. Like it looks organized. It looks way more advanced and like a good way of kind of
I was telling a friend about this, and he said that at least they have a system.
Yeah, at least they have a system. But our system is being deteriorated, especially if you look at the.
Was it better? Or?
I think there was less demand. So when there's higher demand, it's overwhelmed, right? So then, and there's no more money coming to it, right? So like the fact that the U of A Food Bank is at risk of disintegrating should not happen, right? Like it should be supported. It should be a full functioning machine, especially with the high demand, but it's free food. So people don't want to put in the money, and it's really sad because everyone deserves food, right? So.
Yeah. Now, I mean, can we go to another perspective, because both of us studied social justice, and we talked a lot about poverty and how it kind of make people automatically deprived of basic human rights. So food crisis is, I think, directly related to poverty. When we see poverty from social justice perspective, we have some expectations as well, right? We kind of imagine a way out. So what was your thinking when you were studying social justice and you were working with people who were thinking about food crises and food policies and everything? So you were doing two things simultaneously. So how do you think your studies, your ideas, approaches regarding social justice helped, or kind of it can also kind of interrupted your research and thinking on food crisis?
I think it definitely just showed me how intersecting everything is, like how, because I do a lot of work in like climate justice too, and like food justice and climate justice are like super interlinked, but also there's weird ways in which like gender equality is also in there, racial equality is in there, and it's like, well, these things are all super connected, so like why do we see them as different things? And so I'm just like, whenever I read something or like look at something, I'm just like, I see this and I see this and I see this. I'm like, why are they talking about this? And it's like, well, not everyone sees how they're connected. So that was something that I think enriched my experience. So while doing two things at once, I sort of like was able to see a connection between them. And that was really important to me because I think that that's something that we tend to forget. Like the Western world is very like categorize this and separate this and distinguish between these two ideas when like, our world is really messy and doesn't really look like that all the time or ever. So yeah, seeing how everything connects and different ways that if you try to attack one issue, you're either going to run up into the other ones or you're going to ignore them. And if you ignore them, that's a problem. Because then what are you doing? That's not social justice, right? Like that's just, you're inching away at one thing, but if you're doing it in a way that's like unequal to marginalized people.
I mean, it's related to your physical existence so directly. So when it comes to food, and if we think from a moral perspective or philosophical perspective, where does this stand? This poverty and food crisis stand? I mean, how would we kind of morally accept or reject or evaluate it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'd add political into that. Like it's, worried about morality, worried about justice, and worried about politics. And I think like our political structures definitely inform how we view what morality and justice are. You know what I mean? Like if we're living under capitalism, there's sort of a bend to our morality where it's like, yeah, some people are going to suffer and that's okay. And that's not, in my opinion, it's not a very just.
Unaffected.
Yeah. Yeah. And so like, if you see that sort of like structure operating, and it has to operate like that, people have to be poor, people have to go without food to sort of keep that machine running. I don't think that's a very just or moral system. And so like how those things interact can really, they're really shaped by what our structures are and what our political system looks like, and who, I guess now in our day and age is like who's running the country, or like what political views are sort of hot topics. And food tends to be one, but sometimes it can be used against the people who actually really need the support.
Exactly. And you mentioned gender equalities and as a very important, crucial issue. And I remember there was an episode in the podcast called How Much Women Are Affected by Climate Change. And I think regarding food crisis, women are more affected, especially I can see from the global perspective, perspective of global south. I think the case is more or less similar here as well, because women, for example, mothers, are expected to feed their children at first, make sure that everyone else is properly, they get proper food, and it's now her turn is at the end of the cycle. So this is how we expect mothers to be. I mean, and then I think other marginal gender identities or people who are kind of struggling in a different way because of their other identities, other racial and other identities. So do you think that gender equality, I mean, talking about gender equality, at least indirectly, can help ensuring food security?
Yeah, 100%. I think.
If yes, how? I mean.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, also something that I thought about when you said that was like how diet culture and like sexist diet culture also plays a role in this. And so it's like, well, then women, if they're mothers, let's say, they do have that experience where they're like, okay, I need to provide, right? Maybe the father isn't doing anything or just eating all the food or whatever. And they typically tend to eat like
other animals as well.
Yeah.
See?
Yeah.
Mothers are expected to be the caregiver and they are expected to provide food directly. So that's why it came to my mind that.
Yeah, exactly. So like in that case too, with like diet culture, it's like, okay, well, they're already restricted in some way because they're like providing for the family. But let's say you don't even have a family. Well, there's societal expectations on you to be really thin, to barely eat anything, and like what foods you can eat and what foods you kind of can't eat and all these things. And of course, those are all sexually like sexist, like notions, right? And sort of like gender ideals of what women are supposed to look like. And by sort of tackling food insecurity, you can kind of hit both of those things, but they have to be done sort of like carefully, right? Like you can't just be like, okay, everyone eat a bunch of food. But yeah, I think definitely you could see that. And also when it comes to like climate, like natural disaster or climate disasters and stuff like that, it's the people who are most disadvantaged are the ones who are going to suffer the most, right? And you see this especially in the global south, like these are the people who are taking care of their families and going back to help the people who need the help. If there's like a flood or something, those sorts of things, and they're risking their lives all because of a climate disaster that could have been in some ways mitigated, or at least mitigated, but hopefully eliminated, not even existing in the first place, if we had taken a look at, our consumption of like fossil fuels or the food system that we have. And so like those things are also connected. Like it's very like, they can be very meta and it can also be very like local, so there's just many different ways I think you can see that.
Yes. And now we can talk about something personal if
Sure.
it's okay. So what, as a person, when you worked on issues like this, I mean, this is a very community engaged kind of thing, right? You have to think about people directly, and you have to kind of read about them, think about them. So while working on issue like this, which is I think sometimes it makes us emotionally vulnerable sometimes. So how did you yourself evolve as a person by working on the issues like this? What do you think? I mean, this can be a little reflective. I hope it's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. I don't know. I think sometimes you're unaware of how much something is affecting you. Like you're reading and constantly taking in information that's like emotionally hard to deal with, and you can kind of suppress those feelings of like, oh, this is really tough, or this is really hard to get through. And I think I suppressed them for a really long time. So I don't think that's very healthy, but that's what I did. And now I'm sort of like, okay, I think I'm still doing that, but I'm still trying to uncover some of that and, limit myself to like try to remain, sane a little bit so I don't overwhelm myself and then become debilitated. Because I think that's like one of the worst things you can do. And I've done that multiple times where I've become like too emotionally overwhelmed to do anything, and I become debilitated and I can't act. And like, that's really harmful. And so I'm like trying to watch myself for that, because I think that's not going to help anyone, right? Like you have to be, it's sort of a act of like self-preservation so that you can help other people. And so, yeah, I kind of have to make sure that I'm not gonna emotionally implode. But yeah, it was definitely really tricky. And I think having it be your job and doing it every single day, and having to look at, horrible things that happen in the world and constantly be reminded of, all the horrible things, and then just think like, it's so easy. Like, why can't we fix this? And it's like, well, it's really not that easy. People are really complicated. So even if the solution looks easy, implementing that is really hard. And that's something that's taken so long for me to really come to terms with, because I'm just like, it's so easy, just do it. It's like, well, it's not really that easy.
I think this is going to be helpful for me, because for me, when I work on something, I become so kind of involved emotionally. If you have any recommendation, I mean, we talk about crisis, we lament the fact, we become pensive, we become thoughtful, sad sometimes. But if there is any ray of hope somewhere, that might, help us to feel a little better.
I think you might like this. So there's, in philosophy, in particular in phenomenology, which is what I typically do, there's a lot of talk about crisis, which is like the word that you've been using, but I think they use it in a similar way. And how phenomenology works is it says, okay, like let's take your experiences, and that's how we can tell if things are like kind of real, let's say. Like your first person experiences dictate kind of how you live your life and all these things. And like we can philosophically reflect on like what those things are happening, because otherwise like your body is sort of disconnected from your mind. Those things I really enjoy. And I think this like dualist idea is not it. So we really want to have that mind-body connection, and how like, how we experience the world is through mind and body connection. Like we're never just a mind, or we're never just a body, even though we have moments where maybe we feel like it. Anyway, tangent over. So with that sort of like area of studying philosophy, thinking about crisis, sort of what happens in crisis is that you're sort of disoriented, or like you feel like things are shifting around you. And if once you feel that sort of like movement and shift in your world, your perspective will shift. So like I kind of feel like that's how I see what's happening now. Like we're in crisis, so in a lot of ways, but I think that means people's minds are shifting, or like their way of seeing the world shifts, and that can be really helpful because if you utilize that shift, you can sort of like push people into a direction that's more just or more moral or just a better place, right? But you can also go the other way, so we have to be really careful, right? But that's why education and like talking about things that are really hard and like being open to new ideas and like having discussions about them, I think is so important. So like I always sort of come back to that idea, like things are in crisis, yes, but that means there's a point that you can move in a direction that's better instead of
Yeah, I think so. What my takeaway from what you have said just now, I mean, that even if we are seeing things are getting really more complicated, but maybe people are at least in a reluctant way ready to accept new things, and we can share our findings in a way that people can relate and have debate on it, right?
Yeah, but it's also really tricky because when things are shaky, people want to revert back to comfort, right? But this theory and philosophy says, no, the discomfort is good. Like that's where we learn, right? Like that's where we grow. That's where we sort of change the perspective or like move a different direction that we didn't see before. And I think the tricky part of all of this will be getting people to be okay with that discomfort. And that's really hard. But I still think there's hope because at certain points, like there's no going back. Like you can't go back after a certain thing. You can only go forward, right? So, and something that's also comforting is that crisis is like all the time in different parts of the world, of course, but like now we're in like a more global sort of like realm and time period. And I think, yeah, it's just inevitable, but we've always gotten through it, you know, like that's something that's helpful to me is that like, oh, queer people have always gotten through it, or like trans people have always gotten through it. Black people have always gotten through it. And that is hopeful to me because like even when things are really, really bad, they can still get through.
Of resilience, right?
Yeah.
At the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you. And we'd like to end this with something, if you have something to tell people from Bangladesh. Because I think it's for the first time you were talking to a Bangladeshi audience. So,
okay. Yeah, seems like it.
So you should try the
oh yes,
the tea
I'll try the tea.
Chai cha, Bangladeshi cha.
Okay.
And it's getting cold. I think it's already.
Yeah, I was worried about it being too hot.
And yeah, after having a sip, do you have anything to say to the people from Bangladesh? Because they really spend a good amount of time there of their life by thinking about food and prices. So I think it might be useful or helpful in a special way.
I mean, I don't really have any like good advice because, of course, I can't say I've never lived that experience. But I will say that I think people are thinking about like these issues, right? Like that is a really good thing that people are aware, and that there's hope, and that the human body is really resilient, and so I think that can be really helpful. And just knowing that people are thinking about you, I think is like really comforting. So I hope that that's that's sufficient, and I also hope that.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah. I mean, it was really an interesting, and I would like to say a unique conversation for me because I was really expecting something like this when when I was coming to Canada. I was expecting that I would have this kind of conversation, which we had in the class, but I thought it should be a part of it should be shared with a broader audience. So I hope you enjoy.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And Epiphanies from Edmonton is basically about monologues and dialogues. So in two different languages, Bengali and English. So we'll have more guests and sometimes I'll be the only person talking to you. Stay connected. Thank you.